President Kennedy and Vietnam. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the 35th President of the United States from 1961 until his assassination in 1963, the youngest man ever elected to the office. On November 22, 1963, when he was hardly past his first 1,000 days in office, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, becoming also the youngest president to die. On November 22, 1963, when he was hardly past his first 1,000 days in office, he was killed by an assassin's bullet as his motorcade wound through Dallas, Texas. Kennedy was a fervent believer in containing communism. In his first speech on becoming president, Kennedy made it clear that he would continue the policy of the former president Dwight Eisenhower and support the government of Diem in South Vietnam. Kennedy also made it plain that he supported the domino theory, and he was convinced that if South Vietnam fell to communism, then other states in the region would also, as well as a consequence. This Kennedy was not prepared to contemplate. Kennedy received conflicting advice with regards to Vietnam. De Gaulle, the French president, warned Kennedy that Vietnam and warfare in Vietnam would trap America in a bottomless military and political swamp. This was based on the experience the French had in trying to hold on to Vietnam and the battle at Dien Bien Phu, which left a sizable psychological scar on French foreign policy for many years to come. However, Kennedy had more daily contact with hawks in Washington, aggressive advisors who believed that American forces would fare far better if they went to Vietnam equipped and prepared for a conflict than the French had been. They believed that just a small increase in US support for Diem would ensure support in Vietnam. The Hawks in particular were strong believers in domino theory, that if Vietnam was not kept from the communists, it would simply send the message that other countries would fall. Also, Kennedy had to show just exactly what he meant when he said that America would pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend to assure the survival and success of liberty, which was part of his inaugural speech in 1961. In 1961, Kennedy agreed that America should finance an increase in the size of the South Vietnamese army from 150 to 170,000. He also agreed that an extra 1,000 US military advisors should be sent to the South to help train the South Vietnamese army. Both of these decisions were not made public, as they broke the agreements made at the Geneva Peace Accords in 1954, arranged by his predecessor Eisenhower. Kennedy was therefore following a path of military escalation, but still falling short of actually sending US troops in. It was during Kennedy's presidency that the Strategic Hamlet program was introduced. This wasn't a military policy, but a social and political policy to try and win the hearts and minds of the South Vietnamese. This fell badly and almost certainly drove a number of South Vietnamese peasants into supporting the North Vietnamese communists. The forcible moving of peasants into secure compounds was supported by Diem in the South and did a great deal to further the opposition against him in the South. American television reporters relayed to the US public that strategic hamlets destroyed decades, if not hundreds of years of village life in the South, and that the process might only take in half a day. Here was a superpower effectively orchestrating the forced removal of peasants by the South Vietnamese army who were not asked if they wanted to move. To those who knew about US involvement in Vietnam and were opposed to it, the strategic hamlets provided them with an excellent propaganda opportunity. So despite their generosity in building new villages, the forcible removal of South Vietnamese peasants from their ancestral homes and the graves of their ancestors and their land and their crops caused more harm than it actually solved. Kennedy was informed about the anger of the South Vietnamese peasants and was shocked to learn that membership of the North Vietnamese army and the VC increased because of strategic hamlets by 300% in a 2-year time span, the same years when strategic hamlets was in operation. Kennedy's response was to send more military advisors to Vietnam, so that by the end of '62, there were 12,000 of these advisors in Vietnam. As well as sending more advisors to South Vietnam, Kennedy also sent 300 helicopters with US pilots. They were told to avoid combat operations, but this became all but impossible to fulfill. Kennedy's presidency also saw response to Diem's government by some Buddhist monks. On the 11th of June 1963, Duc, a Buddhist monk, committed suicide on a busy Saigon road by being burnt to death. Other Buddhist monks followed his example. In August 1963, television reported these events throughout the world. A member of Diem's government said, "Let them burn and we shall clap our hands." Another member was heard to say that he would happy to be providing the Buddhist monks with petrol. Kennedy became convinced that Diem could never unite South Vietnam, and he agreed that the CIA should initiate a program to overthrow him. A CIA operative, Lucien Conin, provided some South Vietnamese general with $40,000 to overthrow Diem, with the added guarantee that the US would not protect the South Vietnamese leader. Diem was overthrown and assassinated in November 1963. Kennedy was assassinated 3 weeks later. Your task, then, is to choose one of the learning options about JFK's involvement in Vietnam. Please make sure that however you choose to set your work out, you answer the following questions. What was JFK's attitude to communism? What did JFK say about communism? What advice did JFK get about communism? How did JFK help the South Vietnamese army? What was the strategic Hamlet program? How successful was it? What response did the Buddhists make towards Diem during Kennedy's presidency? And what was Kennedy's attitude towards Diem, and how did he try to get rid of Diem? Please use any of the following options identified here as a means of presenting your work. Obviously, any alternatives to these are more than welcome. Your notes for your controlled assessment.